Imagine a negotiation table. It is just you and a hiring manager. In the middle of that table, there is an invisible ruler. Whoever puts their finger on that ruler first decides what the word middle means for the rest of the conversation. If they put their finger at 80,000, suddenly 100,000 looks incredible. But if you had put your finger at 140,000, that same 100,000 would look like an insult. This is not just about confidence. This is a cognitive glitch called anchoring. It is the reason why smart people walk away from negotiations feeling like they won, when mathematically they lost thousands of dollars before they even sat down. Today I'm going to show you the game theory behind that invisible ruler and how to stop letting other people tape it down for you. This is Tom Talks Money, and we are diving into the mechanics of salary negotiation. Most career advice focuses on your resume or your handshake. I prefer to focus on the math and the psychology because that is where the leverage actually lives. Anchoring is one of those concepts that sounds academic until you see it on a paycheck. It is the single strongest psychological force in a negotiation room, and most of us are using it wrong. We are either too afraid to speak, or we speak too soon with the wrong number. If you master this, the return on investment for the next 30 minutes of your time could legitimately be 6 figures over the course of your career. So do me a favor, if you find value in looking at money through this lens, the lens of game theory and behavioral economics, hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel, but more importantly, it makes sure you do not miss the next breakdown. Let's get into the mechanics of the anchor. To understand why your boss has an advantage over you, we have to look at a classic experiment by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They built a rigged wheel of fortune. It was marked from 0 to 100, but it would only stop on 10 or 65. They brought people in, spun the wheel, and let them see the number. Maybe it landed on 10. Maybe it landed on 65. Everyone knew it was random. Everyone knew it was a game. Then they asked those people a completely unrelated question. They asked, what percentage of African nations are members of the United Nations? Logic says the wheel has nothing to do with the UN, but logic is not how our brains work. Here is what happened. The people who saw the wheel land on 10 guessed that about 25% of African nations were in the UN. The people who saw the wheel land on 65 guessed 45%. Think about that. A completely random number on a carnival wheel pulled their estimates of reality by 20 percentage points. This is the definition of the anchoring effect. The first number you see acts as a heavy gravity well. You might try to adjust away from it, but your brain is lazy. It does not want to recalculate the universe from scratch. It just wants to move a little bit away from the anchor until it feels reasonable. Now, replace the wheel of fortune with a job offer. The employer says a number. Let's say $90,000. Even if you know the market rate is higher, your brain instantly tags 90,000 as the reference point. It becomes the center of the map. If you negotiate them up to 100,000, you feel like you conquered the world because you moved $10,000 away from the anchor. You feel like a winner. But if the anchor had started at 130,000, that same $100,000 result would feel like a catastrophic loss. The number didn't change. The reference point did. Most people think negotiation is about meeting in the middle. I am going to tell you right now that meeting in the middle is a trap. If I can control where the starting points are, I can force the middle to be exactly where I want it. This is where conventional wisdom usually tells you to keep your mouth shut and let them make the first offer. I am going to argue that in many cases, that advice is actually costing you money. Let's visualize the table again using game theory. In this game, there is incomplete information. the employer has a budget range, say 110 to 140,000. You do not see that. You have a reservation value, let's say 115,000. That is your walk-away point. They do not see that. When nobody has spoken, the bargaining set is fuzzy. It is just a cloud of possibilities. But the moment a number is spoken, the cloud collapses. That number becomes a coordinate. Every subsequent move is calculated relative to that coordinate. It is not calculated relative to your rent or inflation or the market. It is calculated relative to that first number. Once the coordinate is set, we enter the concession pattern. This is where the loss aversion kicks in. If the employer anchors at 100,000 and you wanted 140, you are now fighting an uphill battle. You have to drag the negotiation $40,000 just to get to your target. Psychologically, that feels like demanding a massive concession. However, if you had anchored at 150 and they wanted 110, now they have to drag you down. The distance is the same, but the psychological burden has shifted. Whoever sets the anchor forces the other person to do the heavy lifting of adjusting away from it. Kahneman and Tversky called this anchoring and adjustment. The key finding was that people adjust, but they rarely adjust enough. We stop adjusting the moment we hit a number that seems plausible. If the anchor is low, we adjust up until we hit the bottom of the plausible range, and then we stop. We don't keep going to the top of the range. We settle for the bare minimum of fairness. That is why the first number is so dangerous. It sets the limit on how far your brain is willing to travel. This brings us to the big question. Should you name the number first? Traditional advice says no. The old saying is that whoever speaks first loses. But recent research, specifically from the Harvard Program on Negotiation, suggests that is wrong. If you care about the economic outcome, you should make the first offer. They call this the first offer dilemma. The data shows that candidates who make the first offer generally end up with higher final salaries. Why? Because they set the anchor. They pinned the ruler down at the high end of the table. Now, there is a catch. There is always a catch. Anchoring high only works if you have good information. If you anchor at 150,000, but the role is capped at 80,000, you look delusional. You might even disqualify yourself. Or, conversely, if you anchor at 120,000, but they were ready to pay 150, you just cost yourself $30,000 instantly. This is why the strategy isn't just say a big number. The strategy is to anchor with intent, based on data. Before we talk about exactly how to pick your number, I need to warn you about a trick companies use called the phantom anchor. This is subtle, and it works on almost everyone. It happens when a recruiter says something like, "Well, we were originally budgeting 55,000 for this role, but we really like you, so we can do 60. Do you see what happened there? The real offer is 60, but they introduced a phantom number, 55, just to make 60 look generous. In that scenario, your brain instantly compares 60,000 to 55,000. You perceive a gain. You think, wow, they stretched for me. But if they had just said 60,000 up front, you might have compared it to your market value of 70,000 and felt insulted. The phantom anchor distorts your perception of the deal without costing the company a single penny. It is purely linguistic leverage. You need to spot this the moment it happens, so you can ignore the phantom and focus on the real numbers. So, how do you use this as a candidate? First, you need 3 numbers. You need your target, which is where you want to land. You need your reservation, which is the lowest number you will accept before walking away. And you need your anchor. Your anchor should be higher than your target. It needs to be defensible, but ambitious. Negotiation pros often suggest using a precise number rather than a round one. Instead of saying 140,000, say 143,500. It sounds like you calculated it based on specific market data, not just pulled it out of thin air. Another powerful way to anchor is using a range, but you have to do it correctly. This is something career coaches like Pamela Skillings talk about. If you want 130,000, do not say between 120 and 140. If you do that, the employer hears 120. Instead, make your target the floor. Say you are looking for something in the 130 to 150 range. Now, the bottom of your range is your target. You have anchored the conversation so that even if they negotiate you down, they are landing where you wanted to be in the first place. You cannot just throw these numbers out and stare at them. You have to attach them to objective standards. This is a core concept from the Harvard Negotiation Project. You say, based on the scope of this role and market data for senior developers in this city, I am targeting this range. When you attach the number to external data, it becomes much harder for them to attack you personally. They have to attack the data. And if your data is good, the anchor sticks. But what if they beat you to it? What if you sit down and they immediately slide a piece of paper across the table that says 80,000, and you know the job is worth 120? You are now in the danger zone. Your brain is already trying to adjust. It is trying to find a way to make 80,000 seem okay. You have to fight that instinct. You need to re-anchor immediately. You cannot just say no. You have to replace their number with a new reference point. Here is how you handle it. You acknowledge their offer, but you label it as a mismatch. You say, I appreciate the offer, but that number is significantly below the market range I have seen for this level of responsibility. Based on my research, roles like this are trading closer to 130,000. Do not split the difference yet. Do not move to 105. You have to put 130 on the table to counterbalance their 80. You need to drag the ruler back over to your side before you start making concessions. The most important defense against anchoring happens before you even walk in the room. You need an internal anchor. This is a number you burn into your brain. It is your measure of fairness. When they say a number, you do not compare it to zero, and you do not compare it to your old salary. You compare it to your internal anchor. If you don't have your own number, you will automatically adopt theirs. It is nature abhors a vacuum. If you leave a blank space in your valuation, they will fill it for you. I want to zoom out for a second. We are talking about anchoring like it's a game, but the consequences are massive. If you let a low anchor drag your salary down by $5,000, that isn't just $5,000. That is $5,000 every year, plus the raises calculated as a percentage of that lower base, plus the 401k match on that missing money. Over 10 years, falling for a bad anchor can cost you the equivalent of a down payment on a house. That is the price of being polite. So let's recap the visuals. First, remember the Wheel of Fortune. Your brain is wired to cling to the first number it hears, even if that number is random. Second, visualize the negotiation table as a tug of war on a ruler. The first number determines the center. And third, watch out for the phantom anchor, the budget they used to have, just to make the current offer look good. Negotiation is an information game. The person who brings the most credible data and sets the most ambitious anchor usually controls the board. The takeaway is simple. Do not go into a negotiation wondering what they will give you. Go in knowing what the number should be and be brave enough to say it. If you anchor high with data, the worst that happens is they say no, and you adjust. But if you let them anchor low, you are fighting gravity just to get back to fair. Set the coordinate. Own the ruler. If you have ever been in a negotiation where you realized, too late, that you were anchored to a low number, drop a comment below. I want to hear the horror stories and the wins. And if you want more deep dives into the mechanics of money, from game theory to asset allocation, make sure you are subscribed. I'm Tom, this is Tom Talks Money, and I will see you in the next one.